For most of my life, I believed that love, real love, was unshakable. That once two people found each other, nothing could come between them. My name is Emma, and this is the story of how I nearly lost everything I held dear, and how I found my way back. Daniel and I had been married for 10 years. A decade of memories, laughter, shared dreams, and quiet moments that once felt like the very foundation of my world. In the beginning, our love was effortless, electric. We were the kind of couple who couldn't stand to be apart, who whispered secrets late into the night, who reached for each other's hands even when no one was watching. But life, as it so often does, had a way of creeping in between us. At first, it was subtle, small things that slipped through the cracks unnoticed. Dinners that used to be a sacred time for us became rushed meals eaten separately, him at the office, me at home. The long, winding conversations that once filled our nights became shorter, until silence settled in their place. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but it wasn't warm either. It simply was. That was the best way to describe our marriage. Not bad, not broken, just there. We lived in a quiet, picturesque neighborhood in Boulder, Colorado. The kind of place where people smiled politely but never pried, where children played in the streets, and life moved at a steady, predictable pace. One of our neighbors, Mark, had moved in a few years ago with his wife, Samantha. They were the kind of couple that everyone liked, charming, friendly, the perfect guests for a summer barbecue. Samantha was a doctor, always busy, always on call. Mark, on the other hand, worked from home. He was always around, always cheerful, always ready with a joke or an easy smile. The first time we truly spoke beyond the usual small talk was on a crisp spring evening. I was sitting on our porch, cradling a cup of tea in my hands, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The house felt too quiet, too empty. Daniel was working late, again. "Evening, Emma," Mark called out as he walked by with his dog. His voice was warm, inviting. "You look like you've got a lot on your mind." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Just one of those days, I guess." But instead of nodding and moving on, he lingered. He leaned on the fence and struck up a conversation. Nothing earth-shattering, just easy talk about the weather, the latest movie he'd seen, the best places to hike nearby. But there was something about the way he spoke, the way he listened, that made me feel lighter. By the time he walked away, I realized that a weight I hadn't even known I was carrying had somehow lifted. From that night on, Mark and I talked more often. It was never planned, it just happened. A passing comment about my garden, a shared laugh over an aisle at the grocery store, a brief moment here and there that stretched into something more. I told myself it was harmless. After all, it was just conversation, nothing more. But deep down, I knew better. At home, nothing changed with Daniel. He was still the man I married, still steady, still kind. But we felt like two strangers moving through the same space, orbiting around each other without ever truly colliding. And the more distant our marriage became, the more I found myself drawn to Mark's presence, to the effortless ease of our conversations. Then, one rainy afternoon, everything shifted. I was walking home from the store when the sky opened up, drenching me in an instant. As I struggled to shield myself from the downpour, a familiar car pulled up beside me. "Need a ride?" Mark called, rolling down the window. I hesitated for a moment before slipping into the passenger seat, shaking water from my hair. The drive was filled with our usual banter, light, effortless, full of laughter. But as we pulled up to my house and I reached for the door handle, his voice stopped me. "You know, Emma, you're really easy to talk to. I don't think I've laughed this much in years." The words were simple, but the way he said them sent a ripple through me, something deep and undeniable. That night, I lay in bed replaying his words, the way his gaze had lingered just a second too long. It wasn't just what he'd said, it was how it made me feel. Seen. Appreciated. Wanted. And for the first time, guilt crept in. I told myself I was overthinking it. That it was all in my head. But the truth was, I had been dancing on the edge of something dangerous, something that had the power to unravel everything I had built with Daniel. So I made a choice. I started pulling away from Mark, finding excuses to keep our interactions brief, avoiding places where I might run into him. But he noticed. "Is everything okay? he asked one afternoon when we crossed paths by chance. Of course, I answered too quickly. Just busy, that's all. But I could see the doubt in his eyes. And the truth was, I wasn't convinced either. Then, one evening, Daniel came home early. The sound of the front door startled me. I wasn't used to him being home before midnight. He stood in the doorway, watching me for a moment before setting his bag down. "Emma," he said softly, "can we talk?" And just like that, the wall I had so carefully built around myself began to crumble. The moment Daniel walked in, I knew something was different. He looked exhausted, but there was something else in his expression, something heavy, something unspoken. It made my stomach twist with unease. "Emma," he said quietly, his voice steady but laced with something fragile beneath the surface. "Can we talk?" The seriousness in his tone sent a shiver through me. I set my phone aside, suddenly feeling as if the air in the room had thickened, pressing down on me. After his words, I found myself caught in a storm of emotions. I had always believed I was someone who could keep her feelings in check, who could maintain control. But now, I felt myself unraveling, piece by piece. Mark had brought something into my life that I hadn't even realized was missing. He made me feel seen, heard, alive. But in chasing that feeling, I had crossed a line I never meant to approach. And now, I had to face the weight of my choices. Daniel sat across from me, waiting. His eyes that had once held nothing but love for me, were filled with pain. A pain that cut deeper than I could have ever prepared for. It wasn't just disappointment. It was heartbreak. A quiet, devastating heartbreak. He had given me everything, and in return, I had become emotionally distant, lost in a connection that was never supposed to mean anything. And yet, it did. "I don't want to lose you, Emma," he finally said, his voice low but firm. "But I need to know, are you still here with me? Or have you already checked out?" His words shattered something inside me. My throat tightened. I had never meant for it to get this far, never imagined that a few seemingly harmless conversations would turn into something that had the power to destroy us. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I don't want to lose you either. But I've been so lost in my own feelings that I didn't realize what I was doing. I was wrong." Daniel studied me for a long moment, his face a mixture of sadness and uncertainty. It was as if he were searching for something, an explanation, maybe a reason to trust me again. But trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt with a single apology. Finally, he sighed and stood up. "I need some time, Emma," he said, his voice raw. "I need to think about this. We both do." And just like that, he was gone, leaving me alone in the silence of a house that no longer felt like a home. The walls, once filled with warmth and memories, now felt suffocating, like they were closing in on me with every passing second. I had never imagined that things would come to this. That a few innocent conversations could spiral into something so devastating. The days that followed were unbearable. Daniel withdrew into himself, and I didn't know how to reach him. We barely spoke. The weight of what had happened hung between us, too heavy to ignore, too painful to confront. Every time I thought of Mark, guilt gnawed at me. Part of me longed to reach out, to hear his voice, to find comfort in the connection that had become my escape. But I knew I couldn't. It wasn't fair to Daniel. It wasn't fair to Mark. It wasn't fair to me. I had to fix my marriage. I had to face the cracks I had ignored for so long and decide whether they could still be mended. But fixing something broken wasn't easy, especially when I wasn't even sure if Daniel could forgive me. Weeks passed, and we tried to talk, but every conversation felt strained. There were too many unsaid words, too many wounds left open. And every time I saw Mark, the temptation to confide in him, to seek the comfort I had once found so easily, threatened to pull me back in. But I resisted. Because this wasn't just about choosing between two men. It was about choosing myself. About figuring out what I truly wanted, not just in a marriage, but in my own heart. I had spent so much time searching for something outside of myself, something I thought was missing, that I had never stopped to ask if the problem wasn't my marriage, but me. One evening, as Daniel and I sat in the dim light of our living room, he looked at me, really looked at me, and asked, "Are you happy?" The question hit me like a blow. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to reassure him. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I looked down, my hands twisting together in my lap. I don't know, I admitted softly. It was the first honest thing I had said in a long time. And once the words were out, I couldn't stop. I told him everything. Not about Mark, but about the loneliness. About the distance that had grown between us. About how much I missed the way we used to be. To my surprise, Daniel didn't get angry. He didn't accuse me or demand explanations. He just listened. For the first time in years, we truly talked. About our marriage. About the things we had ignored. About whether we could find our way back to each other. And that night, I realized something important. Mark wasn't the solution to my problems. He was a distraction. A reminder of what was missing in my life. But what I truly needed wasn't found in someone else's arms. It was in the commitment I had once made to Daniel, the commitment I had let slip away. The next day, I made a decision. I told Mark that we couldn't talk anymore. That whatever had been between us, whatever connection we had formed, had to end. He didn't argue. He didn't try to change my mind. He simply nodded, his expression unreadable. I understand, he said. Take care of yourself, Emma. It was one of the hardest things I had ever done. But it was also the right thing. The months that followed weren't easy. There were arguments. Tears. Moments where I wondered if we were just delaying the inevitable. But slowly, things began to shift. Daniel and I started spending more time together. We talked, not just about bills and responsibilities, but about life, about us. We rediscovered the small things that had once made us fall in love. And in the process, I rediscovered the man I had married all those years ago. Looking back now, I realize how close I came to losing everything. How easily I could have let myself slip away from the life I had built. But I also learned something invaluable. Love isn't something that just happens. It's something you choose. Every single day. It's not about grand gestures or passionate moments. It's about the quiet decisions, the choice to reach for their hand, to sit down and listen, to fight for what truly matters. If you're reading this, I want you to think about your own relationships. Are you present? Are you communicating? Are you giving as much as you're hoping to receive? Sometimes, the grass seems greener on the other side. But more often than not, it just needs a little more care where you're already standing. Take a moment today. Appreciate the people in your life. Have that conversation you've been avoiding. Make the effort you've been putting off. Because love isn't just about finding the right person. It's about continuing to choose them every single day.